Yeah, we can certainly chat about adding Element DeepLabCut to your existing pipeline. Did you get a chance at all to review the repository we have, Workflow-DeepLabCut?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I think we sort of demo there all of the pieces that sort of all of the tables that need to be declared, that the element itself is going to reference upstream. Maybe one feature of that workflow is the aliasing of tables.
Okay.
So I'll pull up Workflow-DeepLabCut.
Did you still need for any of the engineering stuff?
I think we're good if you've got somewhere else to be.
Yeah, I gotta.
No worries. So I will. I have opened the couple different tables that you shared with me as like potential candidates for linking to Element DeepLabCut.
Yeah.
One feature that wasn't immediately clear to me when I started using data joint pipelines was this aliasing process, where if we're referencing something upstream and it's already in your namespace, it's already declared as a table, you can just rename the table so that when, in this case, when session activates, session is going to look for something called experimenter, and we just want to rename that as, we want to pull that table as lab user.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like just a really quick question before you dive too deep, but like what does activate actually do? Because I don't think in our pipeline we ever use like a .activate command.
So there are two features of the elements that sort of facilitate this like parent agnostic effect. So the elements don't know what pipeline they're being connected to upstream. One of those is activate, where let's pull up the element. So in the activate function, we have some checking that like what you're actually passing as a linking module has the relevant attributes. So what linking module is doing here is just grabbing the namespace where activate was called. So when you call activate, you pass in the name of this script here. So in this case, it's Workflow-DeepLabCut.pipeline that is doing the activation. And then there are different places throughout the script of this schema itself that calls linking module to say, somewhere in the parent namespace, I need the device table, I need the experimenter table, whichever it is.
Okay.
The other piece that this activation is doing is actually declaring the tables on the MySQL server.
Okay. So this is able to just run in place by, following the installation of Element DeepLabCut. So we wouldn't like add these scripts to our existing pipeline, I guess, as far as like the Spyglass like repo, I guess, would just import these. They wouldn't exactly exist within the repo itself.
Yeah, it's up to you whether or not you want to fork Element DeepLabCut to make changes in some way, or to have the data joint version be your dependency. There are other lab pipelines that do one or the other, either rely on hours in order to get the updates, the maintenance, and check the change log, or fork it to keep it in a static state and either make changes or manually pull from upstream kind of thing whenever we push updates. The general policy is not to push backwards incompatible updates without releasing some form of conversion script that would help you get from one point to the next.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to like be very explicit,
Mhm.
The things that we'd have to change basically would be to make sure that our like session and subject table upstream of the element have the primary keys that it is looking for or secondary keys that it's looking for.
Yes, in this case, I'm not sure. I'd have to refresh myself on which keys from session Element DeepLabCut needs, but yeah, you would need to provide a table with session information, not for training, but for model where we're actually doing this inference process.
Okay, and I guess another question I had, and this might be something that like, yeah, I was wondering if there's a reason that you know of for the model table not to be dependent on the training table, and it looks like there's like an optional secondary key for it, if I'm not
Yes,
misremembering.
these schemas, train and model, are set up so that train is optional. You don't have to use the schema to train or update the train schema with model information in order to just manually insert a model and launch the inferences from there.
Okay. Okay, and then something else that we had like kind of thought about doing was adding like a DLC like project table, I guess, as well, that would assist a user in like initializing the project with like helper functions to like label frames and extract frames and like edit your config file based off of like a parameter set. Could you, I guess, see like an easy way to integrate that with model training? Or like, is there a way, or would that be the type of thing where you suggest like forking and editing it and then adding like a dependency upstream? I guess if we wanted to, or I guess a more general question would be, if we wanted to have other upstream dependencies, what would be the best way to implement that outside of like, you know, VideoSet and like the other things that are expected, like session and subject?
Yeah. So to provide a little background on the motivation for like where Element DeepLabCut picks up in the broader DeepLabCut project process, is that we anticipate that someone's going to need a GUI to actually do the frame labeling. And when you're doing the frame labeling, that's when you're sort of declaring the project. You can certainly have a table that manages like, these are the projects I have, but at least in the design process, we couldn't see a way of, you know, within the data joint ecosystem, providing a good frame labeling GUI. So that's sort of where it picks up. As for what exists already, part of the providing a user a like out of the box example of using Element DeepLabCut, we added a couple commands here under load demo data. It sounds like it'll be sort of a subset of what you're looking for in terms of updating the config files. And part of what this is doing, this setup bare project, is to take like the very minimal version of the data that we download and set up the remaining folders, set up the training information map file and the H5 that it really uses to launch the training.
Gotcha.
So there's a subset that's here. As far as how to hook that information into the pipeline, yeah, my first instinct is that yes, you would need to fork it and then add a dependency somewhere in the train schema that says this training param set belongs to this project, or maybe this model training table belongs to this project.
Okay. Cool. And I guess we kind of chatted about this over Slack, but I'm still a little bit confused about the like get DLC root data direction or directory function. And I guess it seemed to me like that depended on the linking module. And I guess I was wondering if like your linking module has to have that command, I guess, attached to it. Like say if you're attaching it to like an upstream table, do you need to have like these methods like as a method on those classes?
Yeah, so for Element DeepLabCut to work successfully, it needs this function in the parent namespace get DLC root data dir. Because what it expects is that the paths you're storing in the various tables that reference, project path, video path, whatever, that you're only providing relative path information there, and that this is what provides the root that would complete that relative. This was done with the motivation behind. This was motivated by the idea that different users are going to be on different machines that might have different attached drives attaching to a server, whatever. So the default we provide, or sort of the version of this that we suggest people using, is to put this information in your config.
Okay.
And whenever you're connecting to the database, you're adding that like root path information to the namespace.
Yeah. And that would be in your local config, right? Or
yep.
No. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I think we had chatted about that too. Sweet. Okay. But that method would have to be added to any upstream table as well, basically. Like the get DLC root data, like where it lives currently, is that enough, I guess, is my question? Or would we also have to like append it to the upstream tables? That's something I'm like, yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't think of it as existing like alongside your table schema. At least the way we model how to use the elements in this workflow here is to have a path script that your pipeline can call. Okay. I think the pipeline is sort of how I interact with this workflow in its entirety. From Workflow-DeepLabCut pipeline import, these schemas. From Workflow-DeepLabCut pipeline import these path functions. We tend to model those path functions by modality. Your DLC, your EFIS, whatever.
Okay. Okay. And so so like I guess for the most part we run our workflow through like a Jupyter notebook, and we like populate all of our tables using like a Jupyter notebook. Would this be something that someone runs from that, or would this be something that like, I guess to improve my broader understanding, is this something that would be permanently attached to the database, or is this something that gets activated by a single user when they want to use it? And like, is there a way to, if that is a no, like is there a way to permanently attach it to like an existing database?
So the model implementation we provide is to have this like pipeline be the funnel. This is your interaction point with the database. So in that sense, it's less attached to the database and more the interaction point, where at the top of your Jupyter notebook, you're saying from the pipeline, import the pieces I need, this pipeline script being a funnel that's a catch-all from these other places. If you wanted to attach it to a table, that's possible in theory. to have, this get DLC root data dir being like a class method of one of your upstream tables. I've never sort of messed around with what that implementation would look like. Yeah, I think it would play out in theory.
Okay. Yeah, I guess just to also clarify, like, is this more of like an ephemeral table, like it kind of exists and then goes away, or like, or is this like a permanent thing that would live on our MySQL server and like contain all these things in perpetuity? I guess. Like, I guess when you're activating it, I guess I'm still unclear on like the full functionality of that, but would that just bring up a pre-existing table, or would that bring up like a fresh instance of these tables?
Yeah, the activation function is designed to check the server side, like, does this table exist with the relevant prefix? If so, bring it into the namespace. If it does not exist, that's when the tables get declared. This method for providing the root data directory is not anywhere specifically on the MySQL server. It's in the code base for interacting with that server. Just like, the make functions for a given table are not sort of declared as part of the MySQL directory or the MySQL server. You just have your tables there, and then your code base is what keeps the populated information.
Okay. Okay. And so I guess kind of on that same thinking, like if we were to want to reference these tables in like a different instance of a Jupyter kernel or something, where we didn't have these activated, but we still needed like, or I guess like a different way of phrasing this would be, if we need this to end up in like a specific table before, okay, I guess my thinking, I'm having trouble with this. My thinking is that all of our tables basically live on our MySQL server, and they're more or less permanent, and like we aren't activating them or anything, they just are there. And I think that gives people a lot of like reassurance in some regard. And so if this is like a more, you activate it, and then if you like shut down your Jupyter kernel, my assumption is that it kind of dies, or it's still on your MySQL server, or
Yep, it's the table's still there.
Okay.
There's nothing about the activation function that makes it more ephemeral. It's just a sort of conditional build mechanism. If it doesn't already exist, then build it.
Cool. Cool. Okay. And I guess another question that is more just like a data join best practices, but it looks like in your model table, you have like a ridiculous number of foreign keys. And I guess typically we would like just use like a parameters table for that or something, and then have that as a secondary key. Is there like a, and like just have, or like have it like as a parameters dictionary, and then it would read them all in? Is there like a benefit to having it as a secondary or like a foreign key versus inheriting like a parameter set from an upstream manual table?
Is this the table that you're referring to, the model table? Yeah, so there are quite a few items here. It's a longer table among the ones we provide. The motivation for keeping all of this here is in part sort of a recognition of, in DeepLabCut's definition, like what actually makes a model unique. If I change any of these features, then according to DeepLabCut, the model would be different. A little bit, it's a sort of departure from what DeepLabCut considers a model in their ontology, by saying, no, for us, a model is also defined by the number of iterations. You could, because of where the primary secondary marker is, you could declare two different model names with the same exact secondary key set. But for us, I think it in consideration of some of the folks I talked to about how like, oh, I'll go to one iteration, I'll keep advancing, and then I'll want to revert. This is something we wanted to make explicit in the model table of which iteration you're on.
Okay.
To answer your question about best practices in terms of like when to put things in a lookup table versus a longblob dictionary that you're entering in as a secondary key. My sort of gut there is that I would want a lookup table if I expect I'm going to be using this exact parameter set multiple times. That's the benefit there, which my expectation is for this model table, at least one of these items will change from model to model declaration.
Yeah.
When to keep things in a dictionary as a long blob, so that's what this is here, this config template. The benefit of that is that, you know, as you know, DeepLabCut changes over time, maybe they add some new feature of the config. Well, this can expand to accommodate that without needing, it's sort of future proofing a little bit at the cost of being less explicit.
Yeah. Okay. I guess the other thing I had is like more specific, and it is for the training task. There's a training ID, and I was wondering what that refers to.
Yeah. To speak more generally, these the elements themselves, the Element DeepLabCut in particular, has different places where we sort of set the stage for a populate command immediately downstream of that. So using the suffix task, training task, I think it's called PoseEstimation task, where you're manually pairing two foreign key references and then giving it a unique ID within that table in order for your populate command to like run overnight on each of 20 different IDs, whatever it is. The motivation for having that ID is to make it easier, I think, to reference this is my training task instead of sort of having to search upstream for, wait, what exactly is this video? Give me all the details of the param set. It reduces it down to an integer to say like, okay, tasks 1 through 5, I know I'm working on this project. Tasks 6 through 10, I'm working on the other project. It could be removed. It doesn't need to be there. For me, it was easier to reference an integer than look upstream.
Yeah, I definitely get how that might be easier. And then, but that also means that you have to make sure that you're using a unique training ID every time, or a unique video set and training param set, right? I guess is the other. Like you could reuse your out as a training ID if your video set is different than you.
Yeah, there's no protection against that. You could be working on one video set, one training param set, training ID 1, new video set, same param set, training ID 1. There's no protection against that. I think in my own workflow, I would plan on just auto incrementing training ID.
Okay. Okay.
It's especially useful for when you leave things running overnight. You come back in the morning, check the jobs table to see like, okay, where did it error? It errored on training ID number 10, whatever. Use that to like backtrack through what happened under the hood.
Okay, sweet. Sweet. Okay. I think that's it for now. Yeah, I think that's a good place to start.
Sure. I think in your case, in the 10-15 minutes I had to look through the tables you directed me to, it seems to me that because you already have a definition of session, because you already have a definition of video file, I think the fastest way to just incorporating what we have would be to fork it, and then in that fork refer to this video file table instead of the video set.
Okay. Is there, ooh, yeah, so I guess that's something else, is the video set, I think, is inherently different than our video file, and that our video file, I think, would be what we run PoseEstimation on, but I think our video set would be like the ones that we train on. And I guess that's like something else I didn't really have a great grasp on, but is the video set supposed to just be all of your training materials, like the videos you train on and your H5 and your like CSV or whatever, or in which case I think that might be a little bit different.
If you looked back in the history of, this, all the commits on this, you would see it was initially called like video, it was called something else, with a previous assumption of like, these are just going to be the videos you're training with. We then expanded it to assume that, or to permit the use case whereby someone wanted to, within this video set, keep track of, yes, multiple videos, but also the labeled PNGs to like keep more detailed records of the items they're maintaining. Because it's the case that DeepLabCut is sort of always looking for what's on disk and sort of in the along the spectrum of like how deep into DeepLabCut are we digging and like pulling functions out of versus like scratching the surface. We're sort of only going one layer deep of like beyond the GUI, but here's the command to launch training, not like here's, let's manipulate the command to launch training to look to the data joint database. We didn't really go that far, anticipating that, DeepLabCut is going to go through some developments and that really going to the root is going to result in some breaks, depending on what they decide to develop. So that said, if your training videos are in the config file in the way DeepLabCut expects them to be, you don't need to use this table.
Okay.
You could rewrite this table to update your config file. I'll just bring your attention to the fact that Element DeepLabCut writes its own config file. Instead of config.yaml, it's like DJ _ something config file. And that's what it will use to launch, whichever part of the process you're in.
But that also, like, I don't want to say inherits, but that also is just a copy of your original config, is my understanding, right? Like it brings that all in and then it modifies it.
It brings that all in, and then it makes some modifications to better handle paths. Of all the config files for DeepLabCut I've seen, it's absolute path information. Well, if we're data joint and we're making the promise that this, upstream method of get root directory is going to work for you, then I need to modify that path information in the config file that we're managing.
Okay. And then I guess this kind of gets around your intent, but if we're only using like we store most of our data on like drives that are connected to all of our machines and on the same network, and so we're all using the same like local directory, I guess, and same absolute path, is it worth overriding like that that method to just return a single absolute path, or would that be like would that be like would that, I guess, happen regardless just by activating it in the same place every time? That
If
might not be a great question, but
if you change this like get DLC root data dir to be just like a single hard-coded string of like drive mounted whatever, no, that's not going to be a problem. I mean, you lose out on the benefit of like every time it calls this, it expects a list. So you could give it like multiple different places, and therefore have multiple different root directories. But it seems like y'all have already sort of figured that out and know where the root is going to be in all cases. So that's not, yeah, anything to worry about overwriting, no.
Okay. Anything else you would advise when implementing this?
There's some, I think the way we're using this video recording information is in part to generate an output directory or an output subdirectory. So DeepLabCut would by default just put all of your outputs into the video subdirectory of your file, versus what data join is going to do is going to say, let me take the, here it is. Let me take the device number, the recording number, and the model information to make a subdirectory within videos. I think that is the primary reason why we need device and like session information in the linking module. Depending on how much you're editing in this fork, you could completely override that and maybe not need some of these upstream dependencies. But I don't know. I wrote it, so I think it's a good way to do things, but I only state the deal.
Yeah, I think video recording is probably closest to our video file table as far as like the behavioral video. And so I think we do need to inherit that for PoseEstimation. But I think our approach would probably be to store all of the PoseEstimation outputs in like a single output directory for everybody, for everything, and then just like increment it.
Okay.
I mean, that's just been our approach with like spike sorting and recordings and stuff. Is just to like have a single directory where everything is hosted for the output.
Yeah, it's currently the case that like these long blobs will give you the like pixel value by frame index.
Yeah.
So you could take those and write them as a CSV, or you could have some helper function later collapse across all of the subdirectory CSVs or H5s or whichever you actually want to manage when you generate the NWB.
Is there a reason that you're storing all of the PoseEstimation output in a part table versus like a file that lives outside, like a CSV, I guess, for instance, and then just like having a path that you call from for the part table?
Yeah, we wanted the result to be available within the tables for end users, out of the expectation that some analysis table is going to look upstream at this, and we don't want to save to disk and then have to load from disk again. But you know, depending on how you use data join, different people have different policies on where that like air gap of saving to disk versus being in the table structure is. And then it's a part table in order to save by body part, by these like joint labels.
Yeah. And then also, I know we're over. Can I ask one more question? That's more of like a data join general thing.
Sure, let's maybe just keep it to the last one then.
Yes, for sure. Okay, so downstream, we're trying to basically bring in this like Trodes position tracking and have the option for someone to use that, or have the option to use DeepLabCut. And we are thinking about having like a position selection table for your upstream. And so the way we've considered doing that is you have like your DLC output and you have your Trodes output, and then you have your position selection, and then that position selection has a part table for DLC and a part table for Trodes. And for each primary key, you'd only populate one part table. And then downstream, you would just inherit the master table. Is that seem like a functional approach to that?
I guess I'm not familiar enough with the Trodes output to understand why it needs to be a different part table.
I guess just to have it inherit the different fork of the upstream. Like they're coming from two different parallel pipelines, I guess. And I guess how would you suggest bringing those together so that you're only inheriting one side of that?
I would say wherever you make the, I would try to have that decision be at the merge point. So rather than like, all right, if we have two outputs, rather than saying like, all right, we're also going to have two outputs in the next schema, to say, no, these two output, the next schema is going to inherit one or the other in a part table, depending on what the master table says.
Okay, and so in that merge point, I guess how would you do that by using two different part tables and then just only populating one of those for?
I think I would have some part of the master table say A or B, and then depending on that A or B of the key, that's how I would decide to populate the part table.
Okay, cool.
But I've never done it before, so I can't promise you that it's going to work.
Okay, sweet. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for joining office hours today.
Thanks for having me. Bye.